All right, brother, here we go. You ready?
I'm so ready, Pat. Always ready.
All right, we got a good show, everybody, but it's about establishing a one rep max, how to do
Yes,
it.
sir.
There's one right way, and that's it. We'll talk about it. Obviously, that's a lie. But before we get into that, the normal stuff, we appreciate you. If you want to help support the show, go to variednotrandom.com. Check out all the different cycles that we offer. There's on-ramp programs for body weight, dumbbell, and barbell. There's a new Back on the Wagon program in case, you let your fitness slide a bit and you're looking for a structured re-entry. There's a whole bunch of get your first, strict pull-up. There's some muscle-up stuff, handstand push-ups. There's barbell programs. There's running programs. So check that stuff out. And then, if you are a gym owner, all the stuff you need to do to make your gym happen, from workout tracking to gym management to billing, btwb has an all-in-one solution for that. So if you are a gym owner and interested in that, go to btwb.com and they will take care of you. So now that is done, we're going to talk about basically how to establish a one rep max for a lift. This is something which is so straightforward for some people, and other people aren't sure about how much I should or shouldn't warm up, the jumps that I should do, should I rest, I don't want to burn out too early, I don't want to stare step forever, and so while you might get 5 people in a room with 5 different ways to get to the finish line, I figured it'd be good just to hear what I have found has worked for me over all these years, and maybe what you have found has worked for you. So that's kind of where we're going.
Yeah, well, and at the risk of being predictable, Pat, I think one of the biggest answers to this question is that context really matters. And so I think a couple of the things that people may not consider as much when they think about, when they think about the one rep max, I think, some significant factors come into play around when is the last time you did this specific lift? Is this something that, you're pretty familiar with? Or you're still getting started with it? How long has it been since your last PR at this particular lift? I think those are all going to have some degree of influence on how you choose to warm up for that truly heavy effort. But I do think that there's some general approach type things that you can, pretty much apply no matter what.
I think so.
So it'll be interesting to dive into some of those specifics.
And I didn't even think about it until right now, but maybe another thing that I would say is, it could be a bit different if you're working up for a heavy single. Let's say that you're going to do a workout and it's a percentage-based workout. And for whatever reason, you're like, I don't know my one rep, whatever it is, and I have to use a percentage for this particular workout. Well, then you could potentially just, build up to a heavy single, and then get that number and use the percentage for that particular workout. But that's building up to one heavy single. That doesn't necessarily mean a lifetime max, that the best ever you could do under ideal conditions. It's just for today and how you felt, what was a appropriately challenging heavy single for today versus a 7x1. So a 7x1 might be, because you might work up to a really heavy load that you couldn't touch for another 6 singles versus a 7x1. You can go up, you can go down, you can try to hold the very high percentage for every single one of those 7, so each of those might be a bit different in somebody's head. If they hear work up to a heavy single, they might think a 7x1. And what I'm going to chat about for warming up, you could use for both of those. You just have to play with, what load you hang out at, or do you touch something which is so devastating that you have no chance of pulling another lift with it. But we'll be able to get you there no matter what.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important that people start kind of wrestling with this idea of a workout being something that is progressive and meaning it's supposed to develop you, and a test of a particular ability. Those two things, obviously, like in the Venn diagram of physical expressions, there's going to be quite a lot of overlap at some points. However, there are certain times where you're exclusively in one side or the other, and I think sometimes that gets lost with people. So to your point, if you're doing a 7x1, you may never have the intention of setting a PR that day. And it really is just a training day. And the aid there is in the long-term strength progression. That's what that workout is meant to do. It's not necessarily meant to be a lifetime best. Although if it happens, and sometimes it does, hey, that's awesome too. And you can kind of think about that as the cherry on top of the sundae. Nice to have, but the sundae's still pretty good without it, so to speak. On the other hand, yeah, there are certain times that maybe you've been training for a particular amount of time to express that one lift as the heaviest it's ever been. And the intent is, what do I have right now? Has my fitness built into something that's accumulated beyond what I've done in the past? Well, that's a different scenario to some degree. So, kind of think about that as you enter these heavy lifting sessions too. For CrossFitters, most of the time, we're going to focus mostly on that kind of training side of the house, where even if it is a really heavy effort, I'm not going to say the percentages don't matter, but they kind of don't matter, because really what you're looking for is a stimulus that's heavy enough that it's challenging for what you can do today, and it still progresses you beyond what you've done in the past. So you can do that with a submaximal lift. It doesn't have to be a PR.
Oh yeah, I mean, if we go back to like the 7x1 example, let's say the deadlift. If somebody lifts 90% of their all-time best, most people that I've seen would be sad, because they would see that as being 10% off of their best. Not that it was a 90% effort, but if you walk in for a 7x1 day and you do 7 singles at 90% of your 1 rep max, you have had an effective and beneficial training stimulus for you to be a very strong human being moving forward, even though you were 10% off of your lifetime 1 rep max. And so,
yeah, particularly if your training age is a little bit more advanced, right? If you're younger in the training game, 90% is a pretty big moving target from month to month, year to year. But if you've been at it for a while, that 90%, I mean, those numbers don't change too much too quickly once you've got some years under your belt with the lifts. And so, yeah, hanging out at those higher percentages is even more impressive, because they're higher. The absolute number is higher.
So I scratched down basically a very common way that if I was going to build up to a heavy deadlift, how I would do it. And I've got like my general warm up that isn't overly complicated, and this might vary, but this would be a good just template for people who are curious, is like, hey, how does somebody else do it? And then I wrote down what I would do for my warm up sets, and then when I think I would get into my working sets. And for my framework, that's how I kind of segment something like this in my mind. I have my general warm up, then I start to build up the actual lift of the day. Those are, I consider, my warm up sets of the lift. And then when it gets to an appropriately challenging neighborhood, I close the chapter on warm up sets, and now I've entered my working sets, and that would be 5x5, 7x1, 5 sets, or whatever it happened to be. So that's how I kind of categorize it in my head.
Yeah, same. I like to think through the lift particularly, because for me, the way I warm up changes from lift to lift. And I'll give you a great example. I personally love to squat, and I hate to deadlift. I'm a pretty decent squatter for my body type and my weight. I'm not a particularly big guy, but I can do pretty well squatting. Deadlifting is a different story. It's always been a struggle for me to deadlift well. I still don't think I deadlift that well. Technique is okay, but the load is not that impressive. And so for me, it takes me quite a bit longer to really feel like I'm in the groove and that like my head's in the right place to warm up for like a heavy set of deads than it does for something that I'm more comfortable with, like a set of squats. So my approach changes pretty radically from, well, I'll back up. I'll say to your template, yes, very similar in terms of I want to get generally warm. I want to map out what I'm going to do before I start breaking into my work sets. All of that stuff stays the same. However, I will say for the deadlift in particular, I tend to take a lot more warm-up sets, and I'm a lot more disciplined with the way I approach those warm-up sets than I am for other lifts that come a little bit more naturally. So I guess all that to say, with some experience, those of you out there listening to that, you'll also probably find the same thing to be true. Maybe not for the deadlift, but there's certain lifts that just kind of click, and there are certain lifts that you're like, okay, I got to grease the groove a little bit more to really put forward a good effort here.
So I'm going to piggyback on something you said, then I have a question for you based upon that. So yes, I got a similar thing. If I just think about simple lifts like the squat and the deadlift, it will take me less time to pull a heavy deadlift and more time to do a heavy squat. And anyone following the show maybe won't be shocked by that, especially like post total hip replacement. If we're talking about me going below parallel, I need a little bit more time to get there and to make sure everything's warmed up and the old central nervous system's happy. Like it just, yep,
Yes,
it's going to
squirt
take
some
me.
oil in there.
Yes, indeed. But I can have a bit of a quicker trajectory with the deadlift, for example. I still obviously need to do a good warm up. But with a lift, like you said, if you feel whatever the proper phrasing is, that you struggle a bit more with the deadlift, it's a bit more challenging for you compared to some other lifts. Maybe I read into that thinking that if it's more challenging, maybe it's more taxing. And so do you feel doing a longer warm up or more warm up sets doesn't actually tire you out for a lift that you find more demanding? But I guess not. I guess you found that actually does the opposite.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about the deadlift for me, particularly, is that I'll notice that if I don't spend the time with the warm-up sets, it's not until my third or fourth working set that I actually feel like I've settled in and I'm applying myself to the lift as well as I could be. And so,
Interesting.
because I've battled with that in the past as well, I'm like, well, I don't want to sell out all my energy on the warm-up sets.
Right.
So let's just take some bigger jumps and get to the working sets. But I found personally for me that does not result in me getting my best lifts out the door. I actually have to be a little bit fatigued almost before I really start to feel like the deadlift is pulling the way it should. And it's something that it still kind of messes with my mind even now knowing that, because it's like, man, you got to spend more time doing more sets than you think before you get to the heavy weights.
Okay, fascinating.
Yep.
Well, I'm curious to see, maybe you can walk through what that would look like for you. Pick whatever lift you want. I actually am going to take the lift that you don't enjoy, and I mapped out what I would do if I was going to work up to a heavy single on the deadlift.
Great.
So
I'd be happy to do the same.
okay, so I'll give my general. Now I'm. Maybe this will annoy some people. I guesstimated my 1 rep deadlift. Now, to be fair, I pulled a heavy single. I've done 3s and 5s and a bunch of other rep schemes since then. But this is on video. When I did that rogue 1,000-pound challenge, and I did it at 10 and a half months post hip surgery, and I just pulled, it was the last lift, so I just pulled what I had to break the 1,000. And so I pulled 415. It's on video.
Nice.
And it went up nice. It was heavy, don't get me wrong, but bar speed was fine, And so I think I got about 440 in me, but it was 415 that day. So that's the number that I went off of. Even though I didn't pull 440 in that day, that's what I went off of when I mapped this out. But my general warm-up, I would say takes, depending upon how dedicated I am and not on my phone doing stupid stuff, 12 to 15 minutes of time for my general warm-up. And this might change, but I would do something very similar to this. And let's say it would be 3 rounds, not for time, of 2 minutes of something, whether it's jogging, rowing, or biking. And each time over the course of the 3 rounds that I came back to that 2 minutes of jogging, rowing, or biking, I would do it just a little bit quicker than I did before. Nothing crazy. I'm not looking to make it a workout, but just a little bit quicker. So I'd do 2 minutes of something like that. I would do 8, let's say, hip and back extensions on the GHD. And now for anyone listening at home, this can cause confusion because you've got the hip extension, you have the back extension, then you actually have one movement called the hip and back extension. And that's the one that I'm talking about. I really like that one. So I do 8 hip and back extensions. I'd grab a band. I'd do like 30 seconds of like banded marching, side to side, forward, just in place or whatnot. I'd lay on the ground, do like 10 glute bridges, real slow and controlled with no weight whatsoever. Just pause at the top for a couple seconds. And then I would have a bar set up and I do like 5 to 8 deadlifts. And so in round 1, I do the 2 minutes of whatever, the hip and back, the banded march, the 10 glute bridge, and then maybe I do 5 to 8 deads at like 135. I'd go through it the second time, a little quicker on the run, the bike, or the row. The stuff in the center stays the same. And I'd slap a little more weight on the bar. This time I'd go from 135 to probably 185s on the bar. I'd do 5 to 8 reps. I'd go through it the third and final time. And when I made my way to the barbell, I'd probably put 225 on there and do 5 to 8 reps. And then for me, that would be my general warm-up is over. And that would take me 12 to 15 minutes. Then I'd start building up my deadlift warm-up sets after that.
Yeah, very similar. I'm a big fan of that kind of 1 or 2 minutes doing something to get the huffing and puffing going, not super hard, but enough to
No,
get the
yeah, yeah.
blood pumping. And then
Nothing Sam Briggs to be impressed by.
yeah, exactly. And then alternate that with some sort of warm-up exercise. Big fan of that. Love that structure. Actually have a lot of people that I work with do that to this day. I did that the last time I worked out. But for the deadlift specifically, what I like to do with that is 1 minute or 2 minutes, either biking, rowing, or jumping rope. And then on the off, it's not even a minute, but the offset, some sort of good morning style exercise that's usually progressive. So I usually do it unloaded first, hold the bottom position, extend my arms out over my head in the bottom position to get a little bit more tension on the muscles, feel that position, feel that connection all the way down the spine, get the hammies firing. 8 to 10 reps, not even really worried about reps, but worried about position, posture, and how it feels. Once that's feeling like, okay, it's feeling pretty good, then it's back to whatever movement I had selected prior. And then I'll try to do 2 or 3 rounds of that, progressing the difficulty of that good morning. So it might start with just the body weight, and then, like I said, extend the hands overhead to increase the tension on the muscles. The next round might be single leg, just to get some balance in there, and again, to kind of just stress things in a different way. And then the third round might be with the open bar. And then once that's done, because again, for me, the deadlift sucks, I like to keep it unmuddied by the other preliminary stuff. So I'll work through those kind of good morning style positions. Typically after that, I'll come back and I'll do some anterior hip stretches for the psoas and that sort of thing, just to make sure that they're nice and limber. So like in CrossFit terms, like a Samson stretch or variations of that, big fan of those. Then I'll put the bar on the floor and start working through some warm-up sets. And I've got some specific things that I like to do there that for me, for the deadlift, have really helped me out, but that's kind of my general warm-up. So again, same kind of deal. It'll take me 10 minutes or so to work through that. By the end of it, I should feel like I'm sweating. I should feel like my posterior muscles are active and feeling a good position. Now it's time to get specific with the deadlift.
Yeah, super similar. And, obviously the 3-rounder that I said I do for a warm-up where I go on the deads from 135 to 185 to 225, a lot of that's just because those are convenient plates to grab and knock it up. But it also happens to feel totally appropriate and good steps. And if anyone at home is curious to play it off of what it would be for them, based upon that 440 number I said, that first bar is about 30% of my 1 rep max, second bar 42%, third bar 51% is what it shook out to. So just moving along, just chilling, feeling good. And then after that, I'll do my warm-up sets. And this is interesting because the deadlift is a movement that actually, even given my hip and everything else, feels good, and I can warm up, I feel like, at a good pace for, and you take a bit more, so it's going to be cool. We're going to get to see both sides of this. So now I've finished my general warm-up, and if I'm going to start building up my warm-up sets, this could take probably maybe about another 15 minutes as well, just because I'm going to be taking anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes rest at some lighter loads to maybe 3 to 4 minutes rest at the very end. But I don't want to spend, for me, too much time doing smaller jumps. I like to take decent jumps, but give them a respectable rest. I think if I took decent jumps and didn't give them a respectable rest, I would feel quite different. So what I'll do, I finish my general warm-up. Last bar that I touch is 2 1/4. I'll take 2 or 3 minutes rest, and during that time, I'll load the bar to 275. And I'll do 3 to 5 touch and go reps of that, maybe dead stop, just whatever I'm feeling like that day. But I'll do 3 to 5 at 275. That's 65% of my 1 rep max, 62%. I'll rest another 2 to 3 minutes. I'll put 315 on the bar. I'll do 3 to 5 reps at that. That's about 70%, 71%. I'll rest 2 to 3 minutes, probably 3 to be quite honest with you, maybe even 4. I'll put 365 on the bar. That'll be 82%. I won't do 5 reps. I'll do 2 or 3 reps is what I'll do at that. See how that feels. That's my last warm-up set, right around 82% if I'm going for a heavy single. And then I'll rest 3 to 4 minutes before I do my first working set. So that's going to took me about 15 minutes to do my general warm-up. It's going to take me about another 15 minutes to make my way through some warm-up sets to feel good and give the rest periods the time that they need as well. And in those rest periods, I might walk on the air runner. I might do a couple slow air squats. I might do a couple, again, unloaded glute bridges. I'll kind of play it by ear. It's walking on the air runner is probably a common thing with some gentle air squats every now and then. For me personally, that feels good. I very rarely just sit down on my bench and don't do anything for 3 to 4 minutes. That actually doesn't feel good on my legs. And I will say that final set that I did, that's around 82% of my 1 rep max, so that let's say that last set of 3 at 365, that's a very telling set as to how my day is going to go. This whole time has been gathering evidence, right? trying to find, if you're a detective, where the breadcrumb trail's leading, because sometimes that last one will just feel good, sometimes 365 feels just like it should. Sometimes 365 feels kind of light and fast for the day. And other days you're like, whoa, this feels god awful. Yeah. And all of that, I try to remove my ego, even though I know what my 1 rep max should be, but how I feel on that day really drives the train. But I'm assuming on this day that things are going well. So that's how. So I'm about 30 minutes right now into spending an hour in the gym, and I haven't begun my working sets yet. That's about where I am.
Yeah, love it. So if we kind of take the tapes back, I'm about 10, 12 minutes in, somewhere around there. We've done some basics, mostly focusing on the posture, that sort of thing, getting sweaty a little bit. Now we got the bar on the ground, and I'm gonna start usually with an easy set of 135, again, just because of the convenience of loading. And for me, the deadlift is all about that first pull. That's something that I've really struggled with over the years, particularly when it gets heavy. So for me, the discipline with warming up the deadlift is really focusing on that dead stop every single rep. When I warm up that way and I get to a heavier load, that primes me so much more than just blowing through my warm-up sets where it's touch and go. And it's kind of funny because...
Dead stop's awesome, man.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think it kind of gets thrown by the wayside sometimes, especially in an affiliate environment. I've dropped in and done some deadlifting at affiliates about a month ago or so, and you definitely get some people kind of looking at you sideways when every rep is a dead stop.
Who's the slow guy?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, hey, I got to put that out of my mind because I know for me it's going to result in something a little bit better down the road.
Yeah.
So right from the get-go, it's easy to just brush off those light lifts and say, okay, it's 135, I'm just going to rep it out thoughtlessly. But I've learned over the years, for me in particular, if I'm dedicated from the jump and I really focus on that dead stop position, I know that's going to yield a much better result when I get to the heavy weights. So 135, and I don't really worry about reps in my warm-up sets. What I worry about is I want it to feel good, and I want it to feel like every rep is the same. And once I get to that might take 5 reps, that might take 7 or 8 reps. But once I'm like, okay, I'm in a consistent groove, and this is feeling just like grease lightning coming off the floor. Okay, cool. Rest, and now let's move up to the next weight. And again, I follow your basic idea there. I think most lifters do if they're honest with themselves. I'm going to go with plate convenience until I start getting to something a little bit more significant. So it's most likely 135, then 185, then 225, just like you said. But following that same format of every rep's dead stop, the reps are not predetermined necessarily. They will keep going until I feel like it's either not getting better or it's like every rep is consistent and just coming off great. That's my cue to stop. And typically I'll also say on top of that is I do descend the number as I get closer to my working set. So
yes, sir. Yeah.
First set might be 5 to 8, second set might be 5 or 6, third set and fourth set, they might be 2 or 3. But I almost always do at least a double before I get into my working sets, no matter what rep scheme I'm going to be working on. So whether that's sets of 5 or sets of 1, my last warm-up set will almost always be a double, just again to make sure that I'm hitting that consistency, because that to me is the most important thing.
Okay. Two questions for you that just popped in my head now, and I could answer them as well. Are you belting up, and if so, when, and what are you doing for grip?
Great question. No belt. Almost never deadlift with a belt. I don't particularly like to train with a belt. I get the benefit of it in that scenario.
Cavemen didn't lift with a belt?
Yeah, exactly. No, it's just, honestly, it's really just my preference. I get the benefit of it, and I do think that there's a ton of training utility for using a belt at certain times. It's just not, particularly at age 41, the training that I'm doing right now is way general. I'm not trying to break any records, personal or otherwise. And for me, it just, the juice isn't really worth the squeeze there. I like to train au naturel. So that's really kind of the preference. Grip, I will go double overhand as long as I can.
Hook or no hook?
No hook for as long as I can. And again, once I get to the point that my grip is the kind of the weak link, and like everything is coming off the floor smooth, but like my hands are the things that are starting to fail, then I'll either switch to a hook or a mixed. I used to be a big mixed grip enthusiast, but I honestly, I would say the last several years, if I'm going to choose a secondary grip, it's going to be a hook grip, even on a super heavy deadlift.
What made you do that?
It's a good question. It might be a bit of superstition, to be honest, but over the years I've had a few back issues. Honestly, most of them are not related to deadlifting. They're just tweaks that I've had over the years. And
weak genes.
Yeah, pretty much. And foolish youth, But I've found that I think this is just anecdotal, really. For a time, I would try to make sure I got enough reps with either mix,
right?
Because I was concerned that I might be, getting too much on one side and kind of leaning to one side or the other. And that just kind of evolved to the point where I was like, you know what, like I'm very comfortable with a hook grip. It does not bother me to lift heavy with a hook, and just keeping that posture straight on. Again, I'm not sure that contributes to my back feeling good or as good as it can. But for me, that's just kind of the way it's evolved.
Hey, if it works, it works. And I don't lift with the belt either. I understand their value and their utility, and that I'm in the minority by not using one. The only reason that I don't is I didn't grow up using one. And so even when I started CrossFit, I didn't use one. I mean, who's kidding who? Back then we were all in board shorts and Chuck Taylors. And now if I start to try to get one later in life to put it on, I'm so aware of it that it's like distracting from the lift, and it's actually a negative. And so I don't do that. And obviously understand, bracing and all that good stuff. So I do that. And then I do the same thing. I go double overhand, no hook grip for as long as possible, but then I go to the mixed grip. I haven't tried a double overhand hook. I'm curious as to how far I could go like that. I'm kind of intrigued now. I might give that a whirl and see how that goes.
So if you're used to it, it's not as bad as you think. It's never really bothered me that much. So
okay, interesting. So, but that last set that I did in my warm-up set, the one that was at 82%, that would most likely have been when I switched to a mixed grip as well. And then again, if we're going off of that 440 number that I threw out there initially, I've ended my warm-up sets. I've taken probably a full 4 minutes to now begin my working sets. And when I put this together initially, I didn't really delineate between working up to a heavy single versus a 7x1, but I'd be in that same neighborhood here no matter what. And my first lift, the bar felt good, would probably be at 405, which would be 92% of my 1 rep max. And then I would take probably 4 minutes. Let's say I'm going to do the 7x1. I would take probably a full 4 minutes between every single one of those lifts. And I'm just a big listen to my body sort of a guy. So that first lift at 405 would probably be very telling as to whether is today going to be 7 sets at that lift, which I would be perfectly happy with at 92%, holding for 7, or did it feel pretty good? And if it felt pretty good, I might try to see if I can touch that old 1 rep today, or even maybe get a pound or 2 more than that. And if I did want to try to touch 440, or maybe see if I had a lifetime of like 445 in there, I might do something like quite boring but true, like 405 for the first one. Depending upon how it felt, I could go, I wouldn't be necessarily upset with a 20-pound jump to 425 for the second one, to like hit that big one on lift number 3 of like 445, let's say. Or it might be like, I feel good, but not that good. And then I'd play a 10-pound jump game of, 405, 415, 425, 435, and then, I'd lift 4 or 5, be like, okay, yeah, you know what? I think I got one more, than I have to get 2 more to stair step down if need be. So I could either, again, hang that same weight across all 7 if that first working set told me that that was an appropriate thing today, or I was just within a couple of pounds. I'm going to go up 5 or 10 pounds, but nothing more than that's going to happen. Cool, all good. Or you know what? The stove's hot today, so we're going to cook, and either one would be a play it by ear sort of a deal. But I can say, with all honesty, all of those would be mixed grip, and they would all have no less than 4 minutes rest between each.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, so if we're still kind of coming out of my specific deadlift warm-up, I've done my sets kind of building from 135 up. Dead stop is the priority. Reps don't really matter, but smooth technique and consistent technique are what I'm really trying to dial in. What I didn't talk about was what I do between sets. And like you, I like a big rest. I think it's important for this style of training. But I'm a big fan of 2 movements that might be a little unorthodox when people think deadlift. You're smiling. Why are you smiling?
I can't wait to hear it.
They're common exercises. They're just maybe not so common when people think deadlifting. But I'm a big fan of a couple of static pull-up holds, like at the top.
Nice, okay.
So 1 or 2 reps. Again, I'm not looking to fatigue my upper body, but what I am looking is to just get comfortable with like my lats actually keeping the bar close to the body a little bit. I got a bad habit to kind of check out with the upper body once I start pulling on the deadlift. And so that has really helped me, so in my rest period, I'll go over to the pull-up bar and, I know people get pedantic about grip, but I'll experiment with the grip between sets where, maybe I'll do an underhand grip or a chin up if that's the nomenclature that you have to hear to associate that movement with that grip. Then I will hang out at the top of the bar. I'll try to focus on the posture there and make that feeling feel like, all right, I'm holding the bar close with my lats, and try to translate that to the bar when I get back to it.
So much lat in the deadlift, like for sure.
So I found that to be really beneficial. And then the second thing is I'll do a couple of different jumping exercises. And again, not to fatigue. One of my very favorites is to start seated, like I'm seated on a stool right now. My legs are bent so that I'm seated just above parallel, and I'll rock forward and just do 1 vertical jump. And to me, I don't know if it's just that kind of excitement of the nervous system that I just need a bit of a kick in the butt for the intensity that the deadlift in particular requires, just to light my CNS up just a little bit. That for me is very beneficial without being super taxing. And so those 2 movements I'll play around with. Again, no set rep scheme, it's really just by feel. But as I'm warming up, those are 2 go-tos when I'm prepping for a heavy deadlift.
You want to talk about getting jazzed up and fired up and just queuing up the old central nervous system. Are you pumping some death metal in there, or what do you got going on?
No, it's funny because when I don't know, man, sometimes if it's the environment is too intense, I find it overwhelming, and it's like it almost drains me.
I think you mentioned this before.
Yeah,
okay.
So sometimes I got to take the edge off with the music. Like sometimes getting too much is not helpful for me. So yeah.
Interesting.
So
okay.
Might surprise you there. But anyway, so those are kind of injected in those kind of 2 to 3 minutes between rest. Like you, I'm not just sitting there inactive. Honestly, I'm a big pacer between sets. I'll pace around a little bit, do a pull-up hold, make it feel good, pace around a little bit, maybe hit one of those jumps, and then back to the bar for my next warm-up.
Yeah, I mean, that works. We're not too far off at all. And that, if we're going the 7x1 route, like I just said there, regardless whether I'm holding or building or going up and down or whatever it happens to be, by the end of that, I mean, my hour is gone. If we're talking, I thought 12 to 15 minutes for that initial general warm-up. Let's call it 15. Took me about 15 minutes to build up my warm-up sets. So now we're 30 minutes in. On a 7x1, there's what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6 rest periods in a 7x1 day. If I'm resting 4 minutes right there, that's 24 minutes of just rest there. So I'm at 54 minutes, not including the lifts, which to whatever take 5 seconds. So that's the full hour, and I got to put stuff away and cool down. I still got to stretch and all that, and so yeah, it takes the full hour to do that, and that's generally speaking how I would spend my hour.
Yeah, easy to do. So I'll kind of finish with a couple different things. So once I get to the lifts, I'm a creep up on it kind of lifter.
Creeper.
With the deadlift. Yeah. With the deadlift, because it's not a super confident lift for me. So as I get closer to my working set, like you, I'll start at, 70-75% of what I'm hoping to hit for the day, roughly. And then from there, it's really just going to be small jumps. And we're talking like 10 pounds at a jump. And my rule of thumb is that if the last rep wasn't confident, I stay there. If it feels confident, then I go up. And so again, kind of a loose rule is, all right, there's nothing wrong with doing 2 reps at the same weights. If the first one was kind of shaky and the second one was confident, we're going up.
I like it.
If the first one was kind of shaky and the second one was kind of shaky, I'm going to either stay there or reduce. And then I'll play that same game on the next set. So let's say 2 shaky reps in a row, go down. It's confident. Okay, I'll go back up. 2 reps in a row that are shaky and the next one's kind of shaky. All right, we'll stay there again. And I'll play it that way. So
that works.
Last thing I want to leave kind of the audience with is interesting. I was talking to you before we clicked on. I had an interaction with an athlete recently, and we were talking about snatching.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't like a full 4 minutes rest. I feel like I almost start to cool down. And this athlete I was talking about, we were talking about snatching. And she was saying that she told me she has never PR'd her snatch outside of like a time-bound scheme. So like in every minute on the minute. She's like, I've never PR'd except for like on an EMOM or like every 2 minutes or whatever. And this is somebody, I mean, she was an advanced athlete. We're talking like she's snatching a good amount of weight here. This is not like a novice lifter. And that kind of blew my mind a little bit, but that was her point. She's like, look, I'm a CrossFit athlete. I know I'm not going to set like a weightlifting total, but I do pretty well compared to other CrossFitters when I'm weightlifting. And I find that I have to stay focused and in the game to really be on it for my heavy lifts. And the second I get too much rest, then I can start to wander, my technique starts to drift a little bit, and I don't get the result that I'm looking for. So for her, it was a real balancing act because she recognizes, she's like, I need enough rest so that I can apply myself to the next lift. But if I go too far, then I know that the next lift is going to be a little bit of a stray, and I can't have that. So for her, a little bit of time pressure is actually really good. So that's something to play around with. And I would say, generally speaking, CrossFitters err on the side of not enough rest when it comes to lifting. But you can certainly fall off the other side, and you kind of have to experiment with that a little bit.
That kind of resonates a little bit, to be honest with you, because just speaking for my own community as well, anecdotally, when you say that, it sparked some thoughts in my head. And I would say that I think a lot of people that I deal with respond really well on powerlift days like squat, dead, and things like that with longer rest periods. But like in every minute on the minute, even for like 30 minutes of like power snatch or something like that, I see people have tremendous success with some of the Olympic lifts like that. And I think it maybe doesn't allow them to get too cooled down or whatnot. It's just one explosive lift that takes, 3 seconds. They get, as far as a work to rest ratio, that's a big work to rest ratio for a 3 second lift. You get another 57 seconds of rest when you hit it again. And they get frequent touches of the barbell with such a technique intensive move that they never fall out of the groove. And maybe they're just throwing a couple plates on, and they end up with a really good result. So yeah, we could go down a whole different rabbit hole too, because CrossFitters are a really interesting group of people. Maybe this would be a topic for a different show. But over the years of programming, I've found when you look at some like classic literature for lifting or putting together a strength and conditioning program, some of it matches okay with what I've experienced with CrossFitters, and some of it, CrossFitters are unique. Like if you look at like a lifting chart, or a percentage-based lifting chart, like it'll give you an optimal range for, at this percentage of your 1 rep max, your sets should be in like 3 to 6 reps, and for a total overall volume of this many reps total. And I don't assume that they're lying. I assume that was based off of decades of like finding the sweet spot. And I find so frequently when I look at those charts that CrossFitters could take that same percentage, and whatever they say is like the overall optimal volume, you can almost like add 50% to it. Like CrossFitters have this incredible ability to just keep moving that suboptimal load well over and over and over again, almost like they do well under some time crunch or time. Now, shocking, I know you're doing so many things for time, but there is an interesting thing when I hear all these different things. I'm like, yeah, I can buy that. That makes sense in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, a couple comments on that. I think, gosh, it's been a while since I've looked at all that stuff, but I think it's Prelpin's table, which is the one that is most commonly referenced, that has those kind of percentages and the total volume that you should match to those percentages. Now, you know, the way something like that is developed is through averages. So necessarily there's going to be outliers that either can't tolerate that recommended volume, or on the other hand, they're like, this is, I'm barely warmed up.
The old most.
Exactly. And so, you know, people have to be aware of that. And the second thing I'll say is that a lot of those tables are developed when they're considering athletes that are really focused on developing a single physical attribute. And that changes things significantly. You know, you're talking about like we interviewed Jerry Pritchett the other day, right? Or however long ago that was. A guy like him, when you're looking at the absolute loading that he's exposed to, those percentages become way more taxing for somebody who has developed that attribute singularly so far out. For the average CrossFit athlete who, you know, they're generalists, that's the whole point. Yeah, it may still be 90%, but the absolute load is not such that it's going to just destroy you the same way that an 800, 900 pound load on the body will. And so for that reason, the development of this kind of strength endurance as a catch-all, you know, that's kind of where the CrossFit athlete lives. I think that's a pretty strong argument as to why tables like that may not apply outside of like a specific strength application.
And just the conditioning, not to get way down a rabbit hole, but like, you know, we've got several folks who have come, you know, because you could think that a lot of those tables were people who were just lifting, that they had no care about what their 5K time was.
Right,
you would
exactly.
never see them at the track for a 3x800 meter repeat day that didn't exist.
Yeah, they wouldn't even, there would be this disconnect. It's like, why would I even know that?
And we've got like several like legit power lifters that are now in Linchpin. There's one woman who like set Florida state records. I mean, like, just astonishing. A couple of gentlemen as well. And they'll even say like, it's so funny now that I've got like my conditioning has improved in addition to my strength. Like I know from a lifetime of powerlifting what the loads should feel like, how long I'd have to rest before I do that. Like, and now I find myself like looking in the bar, like 50% of the rest time's gone away. And I'm like, I could hit it again. Like I'm recovered. Like, you know, so I think there's a huge part of now we're getting these athletes that are not just focusing on the lifts, but their conditioning is incredible as well. And so it's almost like a new lifting chart should be created. But anyway, we digress. Okay, well, hopefully everybody, that was helpful and a nice little journey. Who doesn't like lifting heavy? So this should be a warmly received episode by the whole world. If anybody out there has got questions, topics, comments, any of that good stuff, you know, to drive the future content of the show, we want to hear them. You can find this show on the btwb YouTube channel. Post your thoughts and comments there. We'll read that. You can go to Instagram, to the Very Not Random Instagram account. You can post a public comment there, or you can send a direct message if you want to be more anonymous. All those things will make their way here. But for Adrian Bosman, I'm Pat Sherwood, and we'll see you next time.